You wake up tired. Not physically tired, mentally tired, as if your brain has already been running before your day even begins. You scroll for a few minutes, maybe longer, not because you want to, but because stopping feels heavier than continuing. If you're Gen Z and this feels familiar, you are not alone, and you are not imagining it. This kind of exhaustion doesn't always come from doing too much. Sometimes it comes from thinking too much, feeling too much, processing too much, and living in a world that rarely turns off. From a psychological perspective, Gen Z grew up inside constant stimulation. Notifications weren't something introduced in adulthood, they were always there. Social comparison wasn't occasional, it was ambient. Identity wasn't private, it was performed, documented, and often judged in real time. Your brain developed in that environment, and that matters more than most people realize. The human brain was never built for endless input. It evolved for focused attention and clear threats. Now, it navigates group chats, global news, career pressures, economic uncertainty, and algorithmic feeds before breakfast. Research shows that chronic cognitive load, too much information to process, raises baseline stress levels. When your brain doesn't get real breaks, it stays in a low-grade alert state. Not panic, just background tension. And that tension feels like mental exhaustion. But here's where it gets complicated. Gen Z is often described as anxious or overwhelmed, but what's often overlooked is how aware you are. You talk about mental health openly. You analyze patterns. You question systems. You think about your thinking. That's metacognition, and it's sophisticated. The cost of being highly self-aware is that your mind rarely rests. You're not just experiencing emotions, you're evaluating them, interpreting them, comparing them to what they should look like. Over time, this constant internal monitoring can drain you. Another layer is uncertainty. Previous generations had more predictable scripts. Graduate, get a job, buy a house, settle down. The path wasn't perfect, but it felt linear. Gen Z came of age during economic instability, climate anxiety, rapid cultural shifts. Unpredictability increases cognitive strain. The brain likes patterns, cause and effect. When the future feels uncertain, your brain tries to simulate every possible outcome. It rehearses conversations, imagines failure, runs contingency plans. That mental simulation burns energy, and you feel it as exhaustion. There's also the social side. You are the most connected generation in history, and perhaps the most observed. Social media didn't just expand your social circle. It blurred the lines between public and private identity. You're not just living your life, you're aware of how it looks. That awareness shapes behavior. From a neurological perspective, social evaluation triggers the same pain pathways as physical discomfort. Even subtle comparisons can activate stress responses. Not dramatic, just persistent. Even when you're resting, part of your brain is scanning. Am I behind? Am I enough? Am I visible? Am I invisible? This matters more than most people realize. There's also something called decision fatigue. Gen Z has more options than any generation before. Career paths, identities, lifestyles, relationships. Freedom is expanding, but freedom requires choices, and choices require mental energy. When you have to decide not only what you want to do, but who you want to be, your brain works overtime. Research shows too many open possibilities can create paralysis rather than motivation. So you end up feeling tired before you even start. Add emotional literacy into the mix. Gen Z tends to be emotionally articulate. You can name your feelings, recognize trauma patterns, identify attachment styles. That's powerful, but it also means you feel layers of experience that others might ignore. You notice subtle shifts in tone, reflect on childhood dynamics, question inherited beliefs. Depth is enriching, but it is also heavy. Here's the paradox. The same sensitivity that makes you mentally exhausted is the same sensitivity that makes you perceptive. You notice nuance, detect inauthenticity, value alignment. You don't want a life that looks successful. You want a life that feels authentic. And that is a high standard. Authenticity requires ongoing self-inquiry, and self-inquiry is mentally demanding. There's also a biological piece. Your dopamine system is shaped by fast rewards, short videos, instant feedback, immediate reactions. Over time, high-frequency stimulation can reduce your sensitivity to slower rewards. Reading a book feels harder. Long-term projects feel draining. Focus feels fragile. It's not a character flaw, it's neural adaptation. When the brain gets used to quick spikes, sustained effort feels less stimulating. That doesn't mean you lack discipline. It means your reward pathways are calibrated for speed. Slowing down can feel like withdrawal at first, and that can be exhausting. There's also collective trauma. Many Gen Z adults experienced global disruption during formative years. Isolation during critical periods changes social wiring. Research shows prolonged uncertainty during adolescence heightens threat perception and reduces baseline optimism. You may not consciously realize it, but your nervous system remembers. A nervous system trained for unpredictability stays alert, and alertness uses energy. Consider identity. Gen Z values fluidity, growth, reinvention. That flexibility is adaptive, but it removes fixed anchors. If your identity is constantly evolving, your brain is constantly updating its internal map. You're not just living, you're iterating, and iteration takes energy. But here's the important part. Mental exhaustion does not mean weakness. It often signals high engagement with your environment. You are thinking critically, feeling deeply, questioning assumptions. From a psychological perspective, that level of processing is sophisticated. The cost is fatigue. The strength is awareness. So, what can you do? Not necessarily more productivity, not necessarily more optimization. Sometimes the answer is subtraction. Reduce input. Allow boredom. Create intentional pauses where your brain doesn't have to evaluate, compare, or decide. Interestingly, many Gen Z individuals already crave this. Digital detox, slow living, boundaries. That instinct isn't laziness, it's regulation. Your system is asking for recovery. And recovery is not the opposite of ambition, it's what sustains it. If you've been feeling mentally exhausted, consider this. Your brain isn't broken, it isn't defective, it's overloaded. There's a difference. You're navigating more information, more visibility, more self-reflection than any generation before you. Of course you're tired. The question isn't how to eliminate it entirely. The world isn't slowing down. The question is how to create spaces where your mind can return to balance, where you're not performing, comparing, analyzing, just being. If parts of this feel familiar, take a moment to notice that recognition, not as a diagnosis, just as understanding. If this resonates, share your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious how you experience this mental exhaustion. Sometimes naming the pattern is the first quiet form of relief.